Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang saranang gacchami. Dhammang saranang gacchami. Sanghang saranang gacchami. Dutiyampi buddhang saranang gacchami. Dutiyampi dhammang saranang gacchami. Dutiyampi sanghang saranang gacchami. Tatiyampi buddhang saranang gacchami. Tatiyampi dhammang saranang gacchami. Tatiyampi sanghang saranang gacchami. So, welcome to our talk. Tonight's talk, the topic of tonight's talk is called Dropping the Ego. And in Buddhism, ego is probably best understood as the conceit I am. That is, we create a self-concept and we cling to it and we identify with it. And in Pali, this self-conceiving is called mana. Mana literally translates as to measure. And we tend to measure ourselves up against ourselves sometimes, like the way we were in the past, the way we could be in the future, or the way we are right now compared to our ideal self. Or we tend to measure ourselves against others. And when we measure ourselves against others or ourselves, we're either better, worse, or the same as others. We compare. And as well as the I am conceit, we cling to views about ourselves. We also cling to experiences. And we'll often have, when we cling to views, we'll often have this idea of, according to myself. And we often cling to experiences as if we own them, we appropriate them. And this is, we like to call experiences mine. We have a tendency to appropriate things. And for example, I'll talk about my livelihood, my profession, my computer, my video camera, my hut or my house. I'm in my house right now. My meditation practice. And right now, as I'm talking to you, as I'm speaking to you, my talk. This is my talk. There's a tendency in life to have this constant self-referentiality, this self-referring to things. We tend to refer to ourselves a lot. And it's called I aming, it is mining, and it is myselfing, according to myselfing. This I, mine, and myself has a lot of dukkha. The more we cling to it, the worse the dukkha is. And this kind of clinging to this idea of my, I, mine, and myself is often called selfing. So the mana component of it is the I am component. This conceit that I am something. And we create concepts about us with all sorts of things. I am a psychologist, for example. And there's a matter of factness about that. I could say, oh, I'm a psychologist and it's just the way it is. Or I could go, I'm a psychologist. In fact, I'm a clinical psychologist. I could kind of grasp onto that concept and hold on to it tightly. So this tendency to grasp onto concepts as I am is called a fetter. It's one of the 10 fetters. A fetter is something that holds us back, and mana is a fetter that holds us back from enlightenment. It is self-conceiving, taken personally, as if it is an entity and a permanent and independent self. So the Buddha taught about not self, and he taught that there's no independent entities, but causes and conditions that arise in life, causes and conditions that happen. And what we tend to do is we tend to give the illusion of a lasting separate entity with all these causes and conditions. One time he was challenged because he used the term I, mine and myself when he was relating to people. And he was challenged when he was giving a sutta, or he was meeting with some Brahmins, I think. And they said, "Why? Well, you talk about not self, but why do you use the word I go here and according to myself and so on?" And the Buddha said, "I use these terms because they're a social convenience, but I'm not deceived by them. I'm not deluded by them. I can see them clearly for what they are. They are impermanent. They are dukkha, unsatisfactory if we cling to them. There's an unsatisfactory nature about them because they're impermanent. And they are not self, anatta, anicca, dukkha, anatta. This idea of self, this creation that we make of ourselves, is anicca, dukkha, anatta. In other words, impermanent, unsatisfactory, and not self. So, it's good to think of this as a perspective on life, I think. And what we tend to do is we tend to look at the world and ourselves and life and events in the universe as they relate to me, as how it's related to me. It's like we're the center of the universe. And we think about things from an egocentric perspective. It's like we're always the main protagonist in our own mind movies. Have you ever noticed that? The tendency to think a lot, but then somehow it's all about, somehow you're in the movie, you're in your mind movie. You're always a main protagonist. And shifting to a non-self perspective, however, is like losing the filter of the ego, and so we can see things clearly. To shift to a not-self perspective, to let go of the concept I am, for example, is to see things more clearly, more interdependently, to see things as they actually are without having the filter of our ego to see things through, not having that filter of the me, I, mine and myself perspective. So in addition, what happens is that if whatever way we decide to act, our actions are not hindered by the limitations of this self perspective, this self-centered perspective. And it is like a shift from an egocentric perspective to one of more genuine altruism. This is in our actions, in the way we work in the world, the way we live in the world. We can see things rather than from how all this stuff relates to myself, how I am in all this, to a perspective of things are just happening, and we can relate to things without the hindrance of an I am, the hindrance of a clinging to an I am, this I am conceit. So from this not self perspective, we take the me and my making out of our experience of life and the world. We are aware of causes and conditions, and we let go of the ego. So think about when someone gives you unconstructive criticism. And, I don't want to traumatize anybody, because some of us have been terribly traumatized by what people say. So I don't want to trigger that in you. But just think about when someone has perhaps verbally insulted you. And think about the hurt that occurs in that. And I'm not minimizing the hurt. I'm just asking you to reflect on this. If you ask yourself, what is it that gets hurt? And look at this with honest inquiry. If you ask yourself, I'm hurt by this insult, I'm hurt by this criticism. I know that sometimes people criticize what I'm doing, and it kind of stings. It's a little bit of a hurt. Or you do your program and you get your evaluation form, and there's someone, you're getting rather than 9 out of 10 or 8 out of 10, you get this 2 out of 10. Ooh. It hurts. There's a little bit of something that hurts. What is it that gets hurt? If you look inside, you see a lot of times it's your view that you're holding on to, or this concept of yourself, this concept that I am something. I'm a good psychologist. I'm a wonderful group leader, or something like that. So when we come from a not self perspective, it's like those verbal insults or those criticisms have no place to land. They're just arising and passing. They're talking about causes and conditions. They're talking about stuff that happens, but you're not taking it personally, because there's no one to take personally. There's no one for it to hurt, because what we are is this, often what we're clinging to is this self-construct. So what happens is, when we can come from this not self perspective, it's like verbal insults have no place to land. And in fact, what we see is seeing clearly causes and conditions and not taking these events personally. Moreover, what we see is the one who is insulting us is in fact proliferating their own dukkha. They're proliferating their own suffering. They're hurting themselves more than they're hurting ourselves. And it's like, what happens is then insults directed at us become a stimulant for compassion, because we can see the suffering that these people are making themselves. There was an analogy that I used to use when I worked with teenagers. And I call this the analogy of dog shit, throwing dog shit, because people used to relate to it. Teenagers used to relate to this. And it's like when someone hurls abuse at us, it's like they're picking up dog shit and they're rolling it in their hands so that it's a ball, and they're throwing it at us. If, however, we sort of dodge the bullet, dodge the ball, just kind of go straight past. If there's nothing for it to land on, we don't get smelly. But in fact, the person who's throwing it has a very, very smelly hand. This is similar to the analogy of hot coals, which the Buddha spoke about in terms of anger and people angrily insulting you or throwing verbal abuse at you. It's like they're picking up a hot coal and they're throwing it at you. What happens, in fact, is they burn their hand. And if you dodged that hot coal, you're unscathed. So sometimes people criticize me, and that hurts me. It hurts my ego. I feel the rub. And the bigger my ego is, and the stronger I cling to my ego, the more painful the hurt is. However, if I can see this pattern, be honest with myself, and let go of my clinging. There's this subtle kind of holding on to something, this holding on to this concept, this holding on to this view that, I'm really a good person, I'm a really good psychologist, which you may or may not be, but it's the clinging that hurts. It's the clinging into this concept that gives you the pain. So if we can let go of that clinging, we experience freedom. It's like dodging the bullet. It's like stepping out of the road. There's no place for insults or criticisms to land. We can actually listen to criticisms and see them as, that's probably a pretty good idea, for example, and not take it so personally. So this clinging to mana, clinging to self-concept, begins to get worn away in the various stages of enlightenment. There's 4 stages of enlightenment, and stream entry, and I can't remember the second one, but the third one is non-returner, and then there's arahant. At the various stages of enlightenment, we let go of clinging to this self-concept, but the self-concept, this conceit I am, doesn't get annihilated or doesn't disappear until we're fully enlightened. So if you get a little bit hurt by insults, it's okay. Most everyone else does too, and it's just a part of the process. But to the extent that we can let go, to that extent we can feel freedom. So there's lots of ways we can let go, and one way is through insight. We see the true nature of ourselves, and we see that things are impermanent. We see conditions are impermanent, subject to they're unsatisfactory and they're not self. And I learnt a really lovely strategy from Analio. And this strategy was about letting go of the conceit I am. It's fantastic. It was just to simply be aware of it and notice the dukkha of the clinging. Notice the suffering in the clinging and let it go. And the analogy that Analio uses is like dry leaves dropping from deciduous trees. You know how, we don't have many deciduous trees here in Australia, but sometimes in winter you see these deciduous trees just dropping their leaves. There's no effort in it. It just becomes autumn, and it's just time to let it go, and they just drop it. They just drop the leaves. And something interesting that I found out through Analio was that dead trees don't drop their leaves. Isn't that interesting? Dead trees don't drop their leaves. A tree dies and it's got some leaves on it, it'll just stick to the leaves. So it's something about, there's something healthy and vital about dropping leaves, and there's something healthy and vital about just dropping the ego. It's lovely. So here's the strategy. Whenever your ego suffers unnecessarily, just ask yourself, where or what is this ego that is suffering? If we can investigate, look into ourselves, step back a bit, ask yourself, where is it? And if we can see it's just a mental construct, notice the grip around it. Notice how tightly one holds onto it. And if you can, let it go. Let it go. It's so liberating. It's such a relief. One night, actually it was on my retreat a couple of months ago, or a month ago, I found myself ruminating. It was really early in the morning. I got up and I was just ruminating about something. And I was, it's just getting into this story about stuff. And then I asked myself, because I was doing a practice of letting go of the ego, I asked myself, well, what's behind all this? Where is the self that is struggling with this issue? And I noticed I was clinging to a self-concept. I was clinging to a particular concept that I had of myself. I was also clinging to a particular view. And I just dropped it. It was like, once I could see it, I could let it go. And the result was my rumination stopped. And I was able to just be present. I could notice causes and conditions. I could notice my ego. I could notice the freedom from my ego rather than coming from a perspective of me and the world. There was just causes and conditions arising and passing away, and it was so freeing. It's a bit harder when someone is being criticized or you're questioned, however. And sometimes my lovely partner challenges the way I'm doing things around the house. It's not, big things. It might be just the way I'm hanging out the clothes or cooking or something, or even doing some handiwork. And I notice, she's usually right, by the way. But I notice there's some sort of pride. Like, I'll be hanging out the clothes and she'll come out and take the clothes off the line and put them up again. I don't know if that happens to you or not. But she straightens them out and hangs them out properly. Or I'll be doing something and she'll say, no, that's not going to work, Malcolm. Do it this way. So my pride's hurt a little bit. And I notice it. And, there's a temptation to kind of be defensive and say, oh, well, it was all right the way it was. Why are you doing that? Why are you saying that? But every now and then I can stop and look at my clinging and my defensiveness. I can look at my clinging to my little self-concept, and I can let it go. And it's so freeing. She's cool. I don't get into an argument or a disagreement or anything like that. It's just let it go. So letting go of the ego and the pain of the ego is a relief. It's liberating. And I can see how with complete enlightenment, it can be completely liberating. So thank you very much. I think that's enough for tonight's talk. And maybe I'll invite you to, maybe we can just have a brief meditation, and I'll invite you to consider something. I'll invite you to consider not a big insult, not a strong insult, because I don't want people going through dead traumas, but some minor thing where you may have been questioned, or your pride might have been hurt, and I'll invite you to look at what's behind that and let it go. So thank you very much. I'll just bring it back.